Rick Gates set to begin about an hour from now. Let's go outnumbered overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. Gates is expected to plead guilty in the Robert Mueller investigation just a day after being slapped with new charges. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live for us in Washington. And of course, the big question everybody has is, well, this isn't really connected with where Robert Mueller was going in the first place. Fill us in.
Okay, Harris, just within the last hour, this 25-page superseding indictment has been made available for the court. You can think of it as a roadmap for the hearing that's coming up just an hour from now. I've read through the documents, and I would break it down this way. He's expected to plead guilty to 2 counts. One is conspiracy against the United States. That particular count has 2 elements or 2 foundational pieces to it. One has to do with his lobbying work along with Paul Manafort, his longtime business partner, who is also charged by the special counsel right now, and this was their lobbying work on behalf of a pro-Russia party in the Ukraine. And it also has to do with the money laundering of what they say is $18 million, an effort to hide the proceeds from that lobbying work. And this is the count: conspiracy to defraud the United States government or against the United States government. The second count is a lesser charge, which is a violation of 18 U.S.C. This is lying to federal investigators. And in this particular case, it says he lied about a conversation between Paul Manafort, another lobbyist, and a member of Congress about their conversations about the Ukraine, and that conversation took place in 2013. That's an automatic 5 years, but what we expect at the hearing today is that he will receive much less, and in exchange he will cooperate with the special counsel. To your original question, based on what's in the superseding indictment, it talks about history. It talks about 2013, 2014, and also bank transactions that go back to 2010. And those who support the president will say that they do not see in this superseding indictment any evidence of collusion between members of the Trump campaign and Russian officials. Harris.
Yeah, so what I'm looking at are, tax return falsehoods, those types of things. And you say dating back between 2010 and 2014, no one running a campaign or running for president right at that time. And that's really where people kind of interject with this. They say, well, what does this have to do with Robert Mueller's investigation into whether or not the Trump campaign had colluded with Russia? What does it?
Well, what we don't know, and we won't learn at the hearing this afternoon, is to what extent Rick Gates' cooperation with the special counsel moves beyond this period of time and looks specifically at that period during the campaign. But you really can't minimize the fact that he's going to plead guilty to charges, even if they are, if you will, historical and not related to the campaign. The one that really has my attention is this 18 U.S.C. 1001. This is what we've talked about before is sort of the Martha Stewart statute. This is the lying to federal investigators. Former FBI agents have said to me that they rarely see 1001 used for prosecution. Typically, it's used to create leverage and to pressure the individual, because at the end of the day, it may be a lie and not a crime about the subject of that lie. In this case, it's talking about a meeting from 2013, which on its face was not, had a criminal nature to it, if you're following my explanation.
All right. I want to talk a little bit about what we're expecting at that hearing, and also Paul Manafort and how he figures into all of this. You know, on first blush, as we were kind of reading these, because these were sealed documents that we first learned about a couple of days ago, so we've been waiting for the TikTok, for the facts to fold in and fill in everything, Catherine. And so now on a Friday afternoon, as it often happens, we're getting some details on this sort of stuff. Paul Manafort was a guy that we knew had done a whole lot before he was looked at for the campaign. I'm curious how this all kind of comes together. Do we know yet where he's concerned?
Well, just to recap for folks at home, if they think back to last fall, Rick Gates and Paul Manafort were indicted together, if you will, for their lobbying activities, bank and tax, to peel away one of these individuals to testify against the other. And with the expected guilty plea in court just an hour from now, it does appear that they have been able to peel away Rick Gates and will seek his cooperation in the special counsel investigation. Just for some more context, what we've seen in the last week is there there have been a number of media leaks that a deal was imminent. What I understand is that a deal was not firm, but there was a lot of back and forth with one of the lawyers, Tom Green, who was advocating for a plea agreement. As you rightly point out, 32-count indictment was unsealed in Virginia, and this was, if you will, kind of legal pile-on, right? Creates more pressure for the individual and gives them more incentive to reach a deal with the special counsel, which it does appear to be the case here, Harris.
All right, Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. It would be fortuitous if we could get reaction from the White House, and we can. So let's do it. Mercedes Schlapp is White House Strategic Communications Director and Assistant to the President. Mercedes, great to see you today. This is unfolding in the last hour or so, and what is the reaction from the White House?
Well, this indictment has nothing to do with the White House or the President. As you know, we have been cooperative with the special counsel, and as we continue to see, there's no evidence of collusion, no evidence of wrongdoing.
Where does it stand right now with the President sitting down with Robert Mueller in his investigation?
Well, again, the President has been very cooperative, and we've been very cooperative with the special counsel. We want to be open and transparent in this process.
All right. So I know that his attorneys had been looking at possibly some way to make that happen. Has the ball moved at all on that?
I would have to refer you to his personal attorney.
Okay. I want to just press in a little bit because both of these people, Rick Gates and Paul Manafort, now, you heard Catherine Herridge saying almost a legal piling on with all of this. It's a pressure point. Remember the no-knock door raid on Paul Manafort, that very early morning raid, lots of legal pressure. What's the White House's response to these former campaign workers?
Look, these actions, these indictments, they do not have nothing to do with the White House. They have nothing to do with the President. President Trump today, he's been focused on dealing with this issue of school safety. As we know, we've experienced a tragedy in Parkland, Florida. This week alone, he spent time with families and students, law enforcement. He is focused on ensuring that we take action when it comes to dealing with school safety. That's a top priority that we're dealing with right now. As we know, Congress is coming into session next week. He'll be meeting with governors as well as meeting with congressional leaders to address this issue that, as we know, for parents out there who want to make sure that their children feel secure when they go to school, that's what's on the mind of the President. That's what this administration is focused on right now.
And Mercedes, I know that this has just happened and that there is a hearing coming up that we're being told in the next hour or so. So I just want to get one last question from you. There is nothing that we can see, and we've got our journalists here at Fox News looking at this. I've looked at it too, just as I was on Outnumbered, kind of on my phone. There is nothing to suggest that there is anything to do necessarily pointing to any evidence that has so far not existed between the Trump campaign and colluding with Russia. Last thought.
I don't know how many times we have to say this. There's no evidence of collusion. And as we continue to be cooperative with the special counsel, at this point, while there are going to be those journalists that want to keep focusing on Russia and this issue, we are going to be continuing focusing on the President's economic success. We're going to be talking about the priorities that matter to the American people. You go out to Middle America, and what they want to talk about is, let's figure out a way that we can solve this immigration problem that we have. Illegal immigrants coming into the country, something that the President addressed today to the grassroots activists, where we're dealing with issues of having MS-13 gang members coming into our country and killing innocent people in immigrant communities. And so those are the issues that we need to be dealing with. This is where we want to be working with Congress to ensure that we have real results. And under the President's leadership, that's where he's focused on, and he wants to see school safety on these issues of immigration. Those are the matters that matter most to the American people.
We saw him speak for more than an hour today at CPAC. But you know what I've been saying here on the program all week is we've also seen something else that's unprecedented, Mercedes. A signature move that I've been calling it this week, the roundtables that the President has been having, first with victims and family members, survivors of not just the most recent tragedy, but also Sandy Hook and others, and really listening. You're calling them listening sessions at the White House. And then again with lawmakers and law enforcement. I'm wondering what's coming out of that as the President has now enumerated what he would like to see done. What's that list looking like now?
Look, it was a very emotional week here, having those families who lost loved ones in these tragedies. The President met with one particular family who lost their daughter, Meadow. And those are the stories that impact your lives. Those are the stories that make you realize that we need to have real change and real solutions and to ensure that every child feels safe in their school. And President Trump hears them. And he wants solutions to this. And so this is part of being able to develop what we see as permanent solutions, real policy that we know could cause real change, that including improving the background checks, which, as we know, there are these gaps that have existed between the military and the law enforcement systems. It's also ensuring, we saw these failures with law enforcement down in Florida. I mean, the mere fact that you had individuals calling over to law enforcement 39 times and they didn't take action, that's a problem. The issue of mental health, common thread amongst these shooters. And so it's critical to deal with this issue, to ensure that we are using our resources and making sure that all guns are out of the hands of dangerous individuals, those who would be dangerous to themselves or those who pose danger to society. And that's where the focus has to be, where we have to fix these failures. And that's why the president is spending time not only listening to the parents and students, also to the law enforcement officials, and getting their input so that he has a very broad view of what we need to do to move forward.
You know, as you talk about that sheriff's deputy who stood out on the stoop, and we know that they have footage of this because you've got security cameras. We know that happened with that sheriff's deputy who didn't go in for 4 minutes while this was going on. He covered himself. He protected himself. He was there to protect, but he only protected himself. I'm wondering officially from the White House, and maybe if the president has said anything about that, that is a jarring detail to learn.
Oh, the president was completely disturbed by that news. And when you think about that coach, that football coach who stood in front of his students and took the bullets, Harris, I mean, that's why you have to ask yourself, I mean, don't we need these additional resources in these schools where they're able to deter any of these actions? We got to stop these gun-free zones. I mean, those are the areas that we need to look into. And that's what the president is looking into, just a variety of options to ensure that those individuals that are in those schools are able to protect our children.
You know, it's so interesting because I read that the president said, well, why was there only one there on a campus that big with 3,000 students? Great to talk to you today, Mercedes Schlapp. Thank you very much. Outside the White House. All right, so here's the news that's breaking this hour, and in the next little while, we're going to see what happens with former Trump campaign aide Rick Gates expecting to plead guilty and Robert Mueller's Russia investigation for things that so far don't have anything to do with collusion, but certainly have to do with some tax fraud and other things with his own tax returns. Michael Bekesha is Judicial Watch attorney, someone who FOIAs for a whole bunch of stuff so we actually get to see the truth of things. Great to see you today. What's your first reaction?
My first reaction is we're going to see what he's going to plead guilty to and then see what Mueller's next steps are. So far, we haven't seen anything associated with the Trump campaign, and so everybody's still waiting to see that.
You know, we've learned, and we knew this, we were just talking about this a moment ago previously with Catherine Herridge, our correspondent, who's working on these details as they come together in breaking news fashion this hour. We knew that there were unsealed, or rather sealed documents that were coming unsealed so we could see these 32 new counts against both Rick Gates and Paul Manafort. What have you learned, and what can you tell us?
Sure. It looks like he's being charged on bank fraud and tax fraud. It looks as though he filed fraudulent papers with banks to get million-dollar loans. He also seemed to not report everything on his taxes. And then there were issues with trying to get mortgages and whose houses they would be, and maybe saying that his daughter was living one place where actually he was going to be using it. You know, there are a lot of moving parts, but again, none of it relates to the Trump campaign. Everything that took place happened beforehand or tangential to the campaign itself.
You know, Michael, I know as an attorney at Judicial Watch, you're also exposed to kind of how people vet things. What would you say about the vetting process? Because it seems like, you know, there's been so much criticism for the Trump campaign. If it took the FBI this long to uncover some of this stuff, how could they have been expected to vet, to be able to find out what these guys did all the way back to 2010 on their tax returns? Like, where's the reality there?
You know, that's absolutely right. It's really difficult to vet people, and in the quick pace that the campaign was going.
But is it fair to expect the Trump campaign or any other to be able to go back and I mean, that's almost a decade.
It is almost a decade. It's not fair, and it's also not really relevant to what these two individuals were brought on the campaign to do. They were brought on to help with the convention and make sure that the votes were going to be there. You know, that's what their skill set was. That's what they were brought on to do. You know, nothing related to filing taxes, to getting loans involving the banks. And so everything that they're being charged with has nothing to do with why the Trump campaign brought them on towards the end of the campaign.
I know that you and Tom Fitton at Judicial Watch are working very hard to still press on with information gathering with regard to both the investigation that we're talking about now and also some other areas. What is front and center for you right now?
You know, right now, related to all of this, we are seeking the budget for the Mueller investigation. We want to know how much money Mueller asked for, how much money he is spending, and the government refuses to turn that information over to us.
Why do we want to know that as the wider public? Why do we need to know that?
Because we know it's, you know, probably tens of millions of dollars that's being, you know, arguably wasted by taxpayer money. You know, for what is being charged, what these individuals are being indicted for, the Department of Justice could do it. You didn't have to go and create a whole separate team of 17 highly paid attorneys to investigate bank fraud and tax fraud. That's not why they were set up, and it's a waste of money to be doing that.
Wow, that is really interesting. I can tell you at last look, at least for those of us here at Fox, and more money has been spent. It was $7.5 million right after the first of the year, but now it's almost, you know, the end of February. Before I let you go, there is a hearing coming up in about an hour or so, and then we'll also learn more potentially after that about Paul Manafort. What are you looking for to come out of that process?
You know, I think the interesting thing will be what the next step is. Once he pleads guilty, how is he cooperating? Who is he going to, you know, squeal on? Is he going to give dirt on Paul Manafort, or does Mueller and his team think he has dirt on the Trump campaign? You know, my guess it's on Manafort, and then they're going to try and squeeze Manafort for more information. But, you know, this investigation's been going on a little short of a year, and there doesn't seem to be any connection to the Trump campaign. So, again, we're waiting to see what's the connection. Why is Mueller and his team spending all this money to investigate something the Justice Department is perfectly capable of investigating without a special counsel?
Michael Bekesha with Judicial Watch, when you get that budget information, come back and tell us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
President Trump announcing new sanctions against North Korea. He says they're going to be tough. Former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, will weigh in on whether they'll have more of an impact and what additionally needs to be done to handle the threat. And President Trump talking immigration, going after Democrats. CPAC speech, more than an hour and 15 minutes. He said they're refusing to give him the laws he says we need to keep the bad guys out. We'll talk about it. Stay close.
I don't want people who drive a car at 100 miles an hour down the West Side Highway and kill 8 innocent victims. Now they're willing to give us the wall, but they don't want to give us any of the laws to keep these people out. So we're going to get the wall, but they don't want to give us all of the other: chain migration, lottery. Think of a lottery. You have a country. They put names in. Do you think they're giving us their good people? I don't want people coming into this country with a lottery. I want people coming into this country based on merit, based on merit.
President Trump there speaking earlier today at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, on immigration. He went after Democrats after tweeting this morning that they've totally forgotten about DACA. That's interesting. They've shut down the government over that, I thought. Let's bring in Dr. Kelly Ward. She's a Republican running for Senate in Arizona and knows all about sanctuary cities and the topic of immigration. Great to see you today, Dr. Ward. First of all, just want to get your reaction to the president's speech today when he touched on that particular element.
Right. I mean, I think the speech overall was amazing. It touched on all the high points and all the great things that have been going on over the last year during the Trump administration. And on immigration, he was very, very strong. And he did call out the Democrats because he put a very generous offer on the table, and they just shut it down. They showed their true colors, that they certainly are not about the people that they claim to be for. They're actually about the political gain that they can get from this issue. And so I think we're going to see some border security, and maybe we're going to put the DACA issue to the side, maybe offer a temporary solution until we get that border secured. I think the president's willing to do it.
It's so ironic because the Democrats said that they didn't want a temporary solution because it left everybody in limbo. And now they're putting everybody in limbo. Let's move on. Let's talk about sanctuary cities. Because the president really did not mince words when he said, look, if you're going to turn yourselves into a sanctuary state, basically, in California, and you don't want to abide by federal laws in terms of going out and getting people and bringing them in, those that we know that need to be brought in who are here illegally because of crimes, he said, then why don't I just pull the ICE agents out? What's your thought?
Well, I mean, I think it certainly is something that has to be considered. I want people to be safe. I want to make America safe again, just like Donald Trump does. But having sanctuary cities doesn't do that. It doesn't protect those immigrant communities, legal immigrant communities that really are preyed upon by illegal immigrants again and again and again. And so, I think we have to defund those sanctuary cities so that they actually get the message and they change their ways and they start following U.S. law.
You know, how is that going in terms of defund? It's gotten pretty nasty in the conversation, and I'm just curious, as you kind of look at this from a border state in particular, how do you deal with it? I mean, California wants to entirely be, at least some of its leadership said, a sanctuary city. What does that mean, a sanctuary state, rather?
Well, I mean, I thought it was great what Donald Trump said, is that our cities should be sanctuaries for law-abiding American citizens. They certainly shouldn't be sanctuaries for a criminal element. People who came here illegally and go to those cities for the basic fact that they know that they won't be taken to task for the bad acts that they perform. And so I think the defund issue has been somewhat difficult, because I think at the state level we should be looking at defunding some of those cities as well as at the national level. We've seen the courts intervene and do some judicial activism on this front as well, because they are basically saying that if there's a grant available, states should get them no matter what their policies are regarding sanctuary, and I think that's wrong. So there's a lot of work to be done on this issue.
Real quickly before I let you go, and I think that people can see on our big wall the one of the prototypes. I know that you had some prototypes that everybody's looking at. What kind of is the latest on the wall situation that you would like to see done?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that certainly the first and foremost thing that we need to do policy-wise is fund and build the wall. And any legislation that we propose should end the diversity lotto. It should end chain migration. It should defund those sanctuary cities, and it should implement E-Verify so we have accountability in the employer population and the employee population. And then we need to get that physical barrier up, utilize technology, empower the Border Patrol, and I think we're going to go a long way to securing that border.
Dr. Ward, have you ever had or seen this much conversation about this issue in the last few days than with this president? And while the Democrats and Republicans may not be able to come together always, we're talking about it.
Yeah, I know. I think it's great. I think that conversation has to exist. I love the roundtables that he does, though some of these issues, it's heartbreaking that we have to have those roundtables. But it's great to bring people together so that you can actually have true discussion, true debate, and get to solutions rather than just talk about it. He talked about it today. We've heard a lot of words up until he became the president. Now we're seeing action. I look forward to getting to Washington, D.C. and helping him with that action.
All right, Dr. Kelly Ward, thank you very much. First time on the program here on Outnumbered Overtime. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Harris.
Well, we are awaiting President Trump's first news conference since the Florida school shooting, where he likely will face questions on the massacre that killed 17 people. We heard from the White House, Mercedes Schlapp, some of the things he's going to touch on. We'll bring you that live when it happens here on Fox News. The White House is now announcing a new set of sanctions against North Korea. The president talked about this at CPAC just a couple of hours ago. He calls them the heaviest ever imposed. So what will that look like? Ambassador Bolton will weigh in. You know, he wants tough action. We'll talk to him.
Today, the Treasury Department is announcing the largest set of sanctions ever imposed in connection with North Korea.
Fox News Alert, as we have seen the first video of Rick Gates arriving at U.S. District Court in Washington. I want to show you this. It's very short. Former Trump campaign aide. And you heard Mercedes Schlapp, communications team at the White House, say the charges against him have nothing to do with the White House today. She said, I'm tired of saying it, but it's true. Count one against Rick Gates, conspiracy against the United States, and we think that's the tax fraud charges against him and false tax returns that were filed. Count two, false statement to the FBI. So lying to the FBI, that is not the first that we've seen among some of the people scooped up in the Robert Mueller investigation. Again, the Mueller investigation looking for any signs of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. The White House saying this isn't that. But we are watching it. And when it happens, the hearing where these counts are talked about, and he has his chance in court, we will show it to you live today on Fox News. Now let's go to this.
I do want to say, because people have asked, North Korea, we imposed today the heaviest sanctions ever imposed on a country before. And frankly, hopefully something positive can happen. We will see. But hopefully something positive can happen.
North Korea will feel us. The president just announcing new sanctions against North Korea during his CPAC's speech about an hour or so ago. The administration is hitting more than 50 vessels, shipping companies, and trade businesses to turn the pressure up on the North over its nuclear program. Meanwhile, Ivanka Trump is in South Korea for the closing ceremonies of the Olympics, where there are questions about whether she will meet with North Korean officials. They canceled on Vice President Mike Pence just a short time ago as he was set to meet with them. John Bolton, the former U.S. ambassador to the UN, also a Fox News contributor. He's live at CPAC because you are speaking today. So thank you. We've been catching people as they come on and off the stage. Ambassador, what do you make of the new sanctions?
Well, I'm always in favor of new sanctions on North Korea, but let's be clear. For example, the ships you mentioned that were sanctioned today were engaged in activities that were already prohibited by earlier sanctions. And this is part of the problem with targeted sanctions. When somebody says we have targeted X, use the word limited instead. We have limited sanctions to them, and those kinds of sanctions can easily be evaded. But the bigger problem is time. CIA Director Mike Pompeo has said several times recently that North Korea is within a handful of months, his phrase, handful of months, to being able to drop nuclear warheads on any target they want in the continental United States. These sanctions, nice as they are, will not prevent North Korea from crossing that finish line.
All right, so are we entering a zone of we have to do something preemptive?
Well, I think absent some dramatic steps by China, which I don't see on the horizon yet, perhaps there's something going on behind the scenes, I think we're coming to a very unattractive binary choice. Either we accept North Korea with nuclear weapons, or we have to look at military force. Nobody wants either one of these options to occur. Susan Rice, Barack Obama's national security advisor, said some months ago she's prepared to accept North Korea with nuclear weapons. I am not. Absent some dramatic development, though, that's the binary choice we may have to face.
I want to go down a different road, but I'm listening to you closely, so I want to press in on this. What would that look like if we just accept? Is that capitulation around the world? I mean, is the U.S. weak because we are going to let something happen that we might have been able to prevent?
If North Korea gets deliverable nuclear weapons, it will mean that 70 years of American counterproliferation policy has failed. And the lesson will be all around the world. If only you have enough persistence, you too can have nuclear weapons. And easier than we think, because not only will North Korea be a nuclear threat, it will sell that technology to anybody with hard currency. Iran, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, other would-be nuclear states. And North Korea will use this nuclear capability not for self-defense, but for blackmail. For example, to say to the United States, withdraw all of your forces from South Korea or risk the use of nuclear weapons. This is the reason why it's simply unacceptable to allow this bizarre regime to achieve that objective.
You know, I'm not hearing from Democrats on this issue as much. Is this a place where we're in agreement politically, do you think?
Look, if I had to predict today, I'm afraid I'd predict North Korea is going to get nuclear weapons. The cost of the use of military force is very visible right at the front end. The cost of leaving this strange hereditary dictatorship with deliverable nuclear weapons is risk and danger a little bit down the road. But honestly, it will be American citizens, citizens of Japan, whose lives are on the line once this happens. And the nuclear warheads may be delivered not by ballistic missiles, but by putting them in a tramp steamer, sailing them into any American harbor, dismantling them, bringing across the Mexican border, reassembling them in the basement of a building in a major American city. I do not believe it is acceptable for the United States to live with North Korea with nuclear weapons, with Iran with nuclear weapons, or other states like them. But that's the kind of choice we're going to have to face. Nobody wants to make this choice, but we cannot blink the approaching reality, I think.
Yeah, when you bring up Iran and I talk politics, I mean, it was a Democrat administration that gave us the Iran deal, so we sort of know that there's some politics there. Ambassador Bolton will bring you back. Thank you very much. Good luck on your CPAC speech. I'll watch on C-SPAN.
Thank you.
The furious debate over arming teachers after Parkland, Florida. Is this a solution? Insights from a Columbine survivor and a lawmaker on arming teachers, those who are willing. And we're awaiting President Trump's first formal news conference since the Florida high school massacre. We'll bring you that live when it happens. Stay close. Fox News alert with new developments in the wake of the Parkland, Florida massacre. The Florida House has just unveiled a bill that would reportedly allow trained teachers to become armed marshals, you know, like what are on planes. It would also double the number of school resource officers and beef up mental health services. Colorado State Representative Patrick Neville has pushed for similar legislation in his state. And he's not just a lawmaker. I'm talking about you like you're not sitting there. Let me say this. He's also a Columbine survivor, and he attended yesterday's roundtable with the President of the United States on school safety at the White House. Representative Neville joins us from Washington. Good to see you today.
Good to see you as well.
What are you thinking about now that the House in Florida is pushing to do something similar to what you've wanted after Columbine in Colorado?
Well, I'm glad after 19 years of wanting a similar policy myself that this conversation is going nationally. I truly think this is really the only common sense way that we can actually defend our students. We keep leaving them as sitting ducks in these target-rich environments that invite criminals. And I think this will deter these from even happening. If a heinous individual wants to think that they're going to do something so awful, they're going to think twice if they know that they're going to have people that aren't defenseless inside.
You know, what do you say to the critics who say, no, you don't want more guns in schools to answer the bad guys that come in. You want something different?
They're wrong. If we have a good teacher who actually wants to do that voluntarily, I mean, no one's talking about making anyone do it, but if they want to do that, why would we make them defenseless, legally make them defenseless? It just makes